the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
This is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
Greetings and welcome to Connected for AVNation TV, and my name is David Danto, your host. And this is a special episode, a little different from what we've done in the past. I've got a couple of longtime industry colleagues on the line with me, and we're going to talk about, we're in July of 2019, and 50 years ago, we heard those tremendous words, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Where were we? Where were we doing? What were we looking at? What did that mean for us in our lives? What were all the technology benefits to come out of that moon landing? And then, how can we kind of look ahead and see what kind of technology pieces are coming out of where we're going in the future, and look at our, moonshot or Manhattan Project or whatever else is going on in the collaboration space. So first, let my guests introduce themselves to you. Casey King is with me. Casey, you want to start and tell us a little bit about your history in the industry?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me, David. So I've been at Poly for about 8 months, but I've been in the industry for quite a bit longer than that. I've had the luxury of being able to work with some fantastic teams over the years, and I've also been able to work on both consumer-led products as well as enterprise products. So most recently, I came from a startup company headquartered in Oslo, a small company called Hudley. We made some intelligent camera products that were really based off of neural computing and machine learning, so which I think is top of mind of where the industry is going. Before that, I was the CTO at another company that used to compete against Poly and Cisco called Life Size Communications. I was the CTO there for over 10 years, and that was a great run. Did a lot of different projects and products that I think moved the industry toward where we are today. I was at Apple Computer for 13 and a half years, where I really got the bug around video frameworks. I worked as part of the QuickTime team from day zero for 10 years until I left. So that was instrumental on kind of large scale projects. It's probably still being used by over 1 billion people today, 20 plus years later. And then I do have an origin story, going back into the Space Center, but hopefully we'll kind of get to that. But my first job was out of college was with a company called Singer Link, and so I worked right down by JSC, and I worked on the F-16 flight program there, but in the simulator programs, where these are just incredible machines that were cost tens of millions of dollars. We also supplied the shuttle simulator as well as a lot of other simulators to NASA. But yeah, I've got some more stories about NASA from when I was a kid. So hopefully we'll get to that, right after this.
Oh, absolutely. I can't wait. So while we're waiting for that one, Tim, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of the history of how you've grown up in this industry?
Hey, Dave. Good. Sounds great. Casey, good to see you again. So I've been at Poly now for about 23 months, so not quite 2 years yet. Came over. So my job here, as you guys know, is running the group product management team. So anything that's in a conference room, so the video or speakerphones, etc. Prior to coming here, my last gig was with a large company called Yamaha Corporation that had acquired a small startup called Revo Labs, and that was pretty exciting because we were on the forefront of developing some of the USB peripherals that were going into the conference room, larger scale spaces that were enabling the sort of the vast transition into the cloud. So some of the PC-based architecture is now leveraging something that's a little bigger than a personal device, USB connected, to scale into different rooms. So that was a great experience to bring into this life, having worked with a lot of the guys, Google and Zoom and Microsoft and LogMeIn and et cetera, in engaging and figuring out what's the right solution space and what they're looking for, enabling in those rooms. Prior to that, I had founded my own company called Vigo Communications, which was really a view of trying to transform just a simple video experience to a mobile video experience. So we built a 4-foot tall robot and kind of invented the robotic telepresence market, which now Beam is still actively driving with their solutions. So I did that, started in '07 and founded that from scratch with a couple partners out of iRobot. So that was a lot of fun. That was a great experience to build that. Unfortunately, '08 and '09 and '10 happened, so there wasn't a lot of market activity during those years as things were going the wrong way, but it was still a great experience. And then before that was Polycom and PictureTel for me. So I grew up, in the 90s at PictureTel, developed a huge amount of those video conferencing systems. I was the CTO of PictureTel towards the end. We then sold it to Polycom. I stayed at Polycom for 3 years, the CTO of the video division at Polycom. So did a lot of the forefront work on HD during those Polycom years, and prior to that, I was just building, getting the market going, I guess. And then, like Casey said, I started out actually building defense products with that team in my early years. So that was pretty cool to build the rocket defense systems and all the different products that we were working on for the military and for the government. So not dissimilar, probably very different than the things you were working on simulators, Casey, but it was pretty cool stuff. That we were
no
working
strike
on. Really
eagles from
cutting
you,
edge.
Jim. Gotcha. That's
Awesome.
why this is such a cool conversation to have because, the three of us are colleagues at the same company right now, which is awesome and terrific. But we've also known each other probably, in the neighborhood of 20 years, as well as so many of other people that have come together and joined us, which is really cool. And I wanted to get together because we are celebrating, the moon landing. Buzz Aldrin, who I had the honor of meeting a few years ago, and Neil Armstrong and Michael Collins, as I recall, was the flight crew going
Michael
up there.
Collins, dude, yep.
In '69, and I haven't met them, but I did get to meet Buzz, and you think about all the things that came from that type of teamwork and working together. With President Kennedy at the time setting the nation on a goal to reach the moon in that decade is however he wanted to pronounce it. But the things that came out of that, that didn't exist, things like scratch-resistant lenses didn't exist until they realized when you're going to the moon, you had this visor on. As soon as you start rubbing it with something, you wouldn't be able to see anything. So they had to come up with science to develop that. The space blanket that we all use nowadays today, was that came out of how do we make a lightweight something that keeps warmth in. I didn't realize this, that the dust buster came out of the Apollo missions. That was Black & Decker's efforts at creating that high-power portable drill that could drill into the moon's surface, and they then took that engine and developed it, and it became the commercial dustbuster product, which I thought was really amazing. I was surprised to find out, 2020 hindsight, I was surprised to find out that that Velcro didn't come from the Apollo missions. People thought that it did. It was in use. It just became extensively used for some of the space shots. And then there's also that other non-true story that if you go to Snopes.com, you can read about it. The idea that the Americans spent millions of dollars creating a pen that could write upside down, and the Russians just used a pencil. That's, by the way, completely not true. And the Fisher Space Pen was developed separate, not part of what NASA was doing. But it's interesting to look into the mythology around how that effort, how that kind of work led to some of the technology breakthroughs that we were going through now. So Casey, tell us some of the stories that you've been experienced with, because if you've got them, we want to hear them.
Well, the biggest story for me is, when we landed on the moon was in 1969, and I was 9 years old. And I grew up 10 miles from the Johnson Space Center near Clear Lake, which is just outside of Houston. And so so we also lived maybe 10 miles from the Houston Ship Channel. So there was this big mix of rocket scientists in my neighborhood, people that worked at NASA, and then also people that worked in the petrochemical industry. So it was a highly technical kind of cohort of people that were mentors and influencers for me. And it was we'd go blow up rockets and, Estes, solid rocket boosters. We'd fly radio control planes, crash them, rebuild them. Sport aviation was a really big influence for me. I ended up building my own airplane, after the fact. But, where I hung out, even as a kid, I mean, there's just such an influence from people that were in the space program. I mean, my neighbors to the left, to the right, across the street, I mean, all worked at NASA. So I mean, I really credit, kind of my journey from a technology point of view that goes all the way directly back to that. So, not just the products that kind of came out of the space program, but to me, the biggest thing that came out of it was just, what was possible. Being able to take these impossible ideas and, assemble a group of people with the focus, to kind of go after these, just seemingly impossible dreams, and then being able to succeed with that, it was a large team of people at NASA, but they were broken down into small groups. You look at the compute that was available to them versus the compute that's available to us today, and it's just mind blowing that what we have and carry around in our pockets is far more than what they had to send somebody up into space and all the way to the moon and back again. So to me, it was just this this quest for innovation, this quest for just crazy dreams that kind of came out. That was just inspiring, not only to me, but I mean, if you look back at some of the newsreels on how many people around the world, watched this journey, I think it was just inspiring for, an entire generation of people, that grew up. But without a doubt, I mean, the whole reason I went into electrical engineering, and I mean, it was the golden age of aerospace engineering back in the 50s and 60s. And I think, Tim and I will probably agree that, the golden era for us, in the 80s and 90s and 2000s was, the advent of, semiconductors and these computational devices, the PC and the phones and the iPads and, all this, all these crazy things that, we couldn't have even imagined back then. So that's, aerospace engineering in the 50s and 60s, electrical engineering, computer science, since then, and a whole lot of good things to look forward to going forward. So yeah.
And that was something I didn't know about you that we share in common. I was part of the Estes Model Rocket Club in high school. I think the last one that I built was a Gyrock. I don't think I ever launched it. I think I dropped it off the 6th floor of a skyscraper just to see it spin all the way down. But all right, so we have balsa knives in the basement somewhere. That's good to know. And any reminiscences or stories from you, Tim?
Yeah, so I was just thinking about, when I was a kid, a couple of years younger than Casey, but I remember for years I had the poster of Michael and Buzz and Neil on my wall. I mean, that was like an iconic, just, I don't know if you guys had that, the three of them standing there. That was just like every one of my friends, we all had that poster. It was like so inspiring to think about those guys. And then one of my other memories is my family going down to the Space Center and seeing the Saturn V rocket, and just how enormous that rocket was. And it was, for all intents and purposes, right, the actual lunar module was so small, and on top of this fundamentally controlled explosion, right, that was all it really was a bomb that they were controlling with an enormous amount of fuel to try to get out of the atmosphere. I'm not even sure there's a rocket as big as that even today that exists. Those are just phenomenal engineering feats going back in that time when it was so like Casey's saying, so limited horsepower processing, and it just had to work, right? Keep it simple, make it work, drive that into every aspect of the design, right? Everything was tested. And I had a few uncles myself that worked in NASA for years, and they would tell me stories of just how, it was all about the details. It was all about testing. It was all about just driving that philosophy into the organization, about making sure the product was going to work. It was about lives, right? It was about really making sure that the quality was there. And
I was just going to agree with you.
Sure, you design for the target, right? What do you got to do? Design for that. Don't get fancy.
Well, as engineers, I think, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm sure it's kind of universal, is we all I grew up in this era that was defined in terms of mission management. I guess it would be, is it Kranz who did it there, or whoever was the idea of, let's make sure that we have each person managing a piece of this, and we all have to have, what's the go no go point, and how do we work together to achieve this goal, and then, the successful failure, of the Apollo 13 mission. The idea is, all right, something's gone wrong in the middle. How do we determine what the status is? How do we fix the situation? How do we revive? And it's like these are so ingrained in me, and I guess in all of us, in terms of how to approach projects and science. Half reality and half Star Trek. It was really kind of interesting at the time that we've all kind of developed this mindset of everything is achievable if you work at it and you get the correct pieces there, and that came out of this whole 1960s mindset of the Apollo missions.
I agree with you, David, because it was the driver in a lot of respects to innovation. Now we've been in this innovation now for over 100 years. If you go back to Henry Ford, but this was like taking it to the technology, electronics, and I think it was really inspirational for a lot of people to see. Boy, that was a really hard problem that just got solved. We can probably do a lot more, right, with the technology that's been being developed, chipsets, processing, et cetera. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. But boy, what an effort to go after, right?
So grounding that conversation to kind of where we are today and what we do today. The Apollo 11 had black and white images from the moon live, going across with that much of a delay, going that far over. Apollo 12 was supposed to have color, but I'm going to forget the name of the astronaut, which gets me upset, that accidentally aimed it into the sun, so the tube was burned. But the idea of where real-time communications has come from that Apollo landing to now, and that's the business that we're in. Just think about what we've lived through in that era from like the 1990s through to the early 2000s. Remember ISDN? 2B plus D times 4, and making those connections work with an NTU, and then we started using IP connectivity and
what's sad, Dave, is that we do remember ISDN, all three of us.
It's terrible what we had to live through, and then we're now in the era, and I'll bring it over to more modern cases where just in the last 2 years alone we've talked about getting rid of the pan-tilt zoom camera. We're now doing EPTZs everywhere, no more motors. Where we're now talking about really high quality video of the public over the public internet. We're not talking about these expensive exchanges that popped up in the early 2000s. Now we're able to pump 1K, 2K, really high quality video streams just over, hey, my home, I'm using the Verizon Fios for this right now, and it's very high quality stuff. What's gone on with AI, the ability for cameras to track and understand who's speaking and recognize faces. Microarrays, what was a microarray? I mean, they've existed for years. Nobody talked about them. This idea of this beam forming capability where you can, the changes that have happened in our space just in the last couple of years are almost like what's been going on with this moonshot. And I guess, if I think about it, it kind of came out of this whole democratization era, this idea that you don't have to put in $1 million system or $500,000 system or even a $40,000, $50,000 system. We're doing video off of our phones. Casey, as you pointed out, things that have more powerful processing than we use to get to the moon. And it's interesting to be living in these times and see all the changes right in front of us and kind of relate it to that same explosion of technology. Do you guys feel that way when you go through this?
Yeah, I'll start, but it's the supply chain of what's happened on the smartphones and the portable devices has really changed, almost everything that we've done. It's, we started with really kind of high-end chipsets and DSPs and built pretty expensive dedicated appliances toward that. And today, even the EPTZ cameras, the optics, the sensors, the SoCs, are all being driven, by these little devices that we carry around with us almost everywhere. And there's just this, if there's a problem with it, it's a problem of addiction. You guys have all read the same stuff I have, where, we're using these devices, 6+ hours a day. And they're just incredible devices, that create all different kinds of use cases. But I used to give a presentation that I haven't in a long time about kind of the state of where video compression is and, kind of the history of that. And back there used to be kind of two different paths. One were proprietary codecs, and then one were standard-based codecs like H.261, 263, et cetera. But I had the opportunity to kind of live in both worlds. And at Apple, we were clearly on the proprietary codecs that we developed ourselves because we could make them run on general-purpose processors, which was pretty unique at the time. Back in the 1990, 1991, and my son was born in 1991, and it was just a couple days before we shipped the beta CD of QuickTime, and there were 5 clips that ended up on the beta CD, going, dating ourselves back to the kind of media that we used to use, but these were, they were, 160 by 120 playing at 5 frames per second, nothing like it before, everything like it since. It was, took up, 600 kilobits per second. And those clips are still playable today, over 25 years later, which I think is pretty phenomenal. In this age of kind of digital decay of media subsystems. But then you look at Sorensen codecs that were twice the resolution at half the bit rate. Then there was this convergence towards standard-based codecs and H.264, being able to do HD video at 1 megabit, 4K video at under 2 megabits, and it's just and you go back to pull it back to the space station where this telemetry of data, they were doing real-time communication all the way up to the moon, so it is quite shocking, and I mean it's effortless to pull out a smartphone today and do a FaceTime call to my family. It's effortless to use a really high-end enterprise video communication system, and to kind of pull these parallels back to the science that really kind of started decades ago is really kind of fun to look at.
Agree completely. Tim, any thoughts from you on that?
Well, yeah, I think that the point Casey's hitting on here is that it's the standardization of the architectures, which is really going to drive mass volume of usage and also availability, right? I mean, we've talked about the early days of PictureTel. There's so many chips in those products that the trick was getting it all to work. Right, so a huge amount of engineering effort was put into distributing the processing across a variety of different processors, and then the bus interfaces, and just connecting everything together, and then making it work over what was fundamentally an unstable network. All that now has changed in a lot of respects. So a lot of the what were the difficult hurdles of early video communication have been replaced with, bandwidth. So bandwidth helps all things, right? But also the processors now, and it's that smartphone architecture model of you don't necessarily need 3 or 4 or 5 or 20 chips to get to where we need to get to. It's starting to be single processor architectures are more than enough horsepower to deliver what is a great experience for your typical user. And now, and that's, to me, I see the tipping point with video. It's starting to get to the area where the cost profile is no longer an issue, right? The networks are there, right? The connectivity models are there. The costs of the services can be very attractive, approaching telephony, right? Most telephony services are free today. You pretty much get it with your bandwidth in your consumer space or in your company. And now, so the video is going in that direction from a connectivity perspective. And then it really becomes an endpoint. What are the form factors? What are the verticals? All that, transpiring from, let's connect up to the moon to now let's just connect everybody and make it super easy all the time. And I think it just continues to explode. It's super exciting. We talked about this a little bit earlier off the call. It's super exciting to see finally, after 20-something years, that the whole video experience is everywhere. Where this is just ingrained in the workflow. The numbers that we all hear from some of our largest customers and the minutes they're doing is just mind-boggling. Compared to
it's where we've always promised it could be.
It really is.
The ads for those PictureTel systems that were in the airplane magazines that talked about it was just like being there. It's taken us, 20, 30 years, but actually now finally it is just like being there. So, it's I love to have lived through the fact that we actually met the promise of video everywhere. And I guess I'll ask you guys, kind of take out your crystal balls here, and think about the Dustbuster, and think about Velcro, and think about space blankets, and what are we going to start seeing in our space as these future technologies creep into our products and other people's products, and the nature of what we do as a business changes around collaboration. Where do you guys think it's going?
Well, I'll take
Do you want to go first?
I'll take a stab at it. Today it's well, first of all, there's over 50, for the first time ever, over 50% of the world population is connected to the internet. So there's this network effect, that you need to have people to talk to, to kind of validate the technology that you're building. So that's kind of a check on that one. We talked about ePTZ cameras and these, again, coming out of the smartphone supply chain, these sensors that are very, very high density sensors, very, very good optics, very good SoCs that can process this. So we're definitely going to see less mechanical PTZ cameras and a lot more of these really small form factor cameras that we can actually, mesh them together and have lots of these cameras, in space that can work and coordinate, together to create, a better experience for our users. But the two things I think that are kind of the mega trends, at least for me, are, just the culture of collaboration and the behavior that we have, and the places that we work, are changing, that are really, it's almost like it's this perfect intersection between the technology and then kind of the behavior of the users today. So, there's so many people that I think it's something in the 60, 70, 80%, kind of range of people that will work remotely because the tools are just so great. You guys today, both of you guys are, I think Tim is up in Maine. I think, David, you guys are both at home offices. I'm actually came into the office today, but, this is just off of your home internet, that we're able to do, business class, type of collaboration. So people can work anywhere. The spaces that we work in the enterprise are smaller rooms. They're open offices. They're, it's people are just as likely to take a video call at an airport lounge or Starbucks, coffee shop. The friction to get into these calls is just so low today. So I think that there's this behavior change, and some of it's demographics and, kind of the people that are coming, the younger people that are kind of coming into the market, they're just kind of demanding it. The other one is around, if there's a technology point, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, a lot more, but for me, this advent of machine learning and deep learning, these new tools that we can put into our toolkit to analyze data both at the edge as well as in the cloud, to create better insights, better user experiences directly for our customers, better understanding of how people are using systems. Those two things, culture, behavior, and then also the technology on the deep learning side, are going to allow us this toolkit to create just very, very differentiated products.
Yeah, well, I'll debate one thing that you said there. While I agree with 99% of it, I think there is still quite a bit of friction when it comes to understanding how to collaborate amongst people that aren't us, that aren't the technology geeks that grew up with NASA. So when you have the average person and they need to start a meeting, they'll either go to their desk or they'll pick up their mobile or they'll walk into a room, and many times they don't know where to start. There might be an outdated touch panel in the room that half of them are afraid to touch. Maybe they'll go in and they'll sit in a room that's meant to use one type of conferencing, but the brand they've been invited to isn't compatible. So I think the friction is still something we need to work on. How do we coordinate people's itinerary and activities so we know we're all available and we know when the right time to meet is? How do we find the room or the space? How do we pick the platform? And how do we make sure that it works? If you're in a brand A shop and everything is brand A, and you get an invitation from another firm which is a brand B component, how do you join that call? Do you have to get your IT people in the room? Those, I think, are some of the problems that'll be solved by some of the machine learning and AI that we've been talking about going forward. And I think it's really a requirement that we do that in order to really get to the next level.
Yeah, I think that Tim can chime in on this too, but I think that that's a problem that exists for us, and it exists for us and kind of the space that we work in. my friends who are not technology friends have no problem at all, doing a FaceTime call between themselves or between themselves or a family or whether it's Duo or whatever. They have no problem, creating 1 trillion images that get done per year, on Instagram. They have no problem sharing those that data. So I mean, I think that problem is true, definitely for us to solve. I mean, if you're in a vertically kind of integrated shop, that problem doesn't exist. But the dynamics, I think, are very interesting to look at. In the place where we go into an enterprise call, if you walk into this unknown conference room, you're a vendor, you just kind of walk in, you're also trying to sell a significantly large deal to these people. You're going to be almost fearful to kind of take the helm of using their AV equipment. So you don't know what it is, you don't know how to use it. You're going to stay away from anything that generates that call. But I agree with you 100%. I mean, I'm driven by this. At work, I'm driven by this, and inside this, I'm driven by my calendar. And I should be able to go into any conference room around the world, and whether it's Blue Jeans or Zoom or Meet or Chime or Log Me In or anything, I should be able to just touch on something and the experience should just automatically kind of work, fit in and stand out is one way we've talked about it in the past of this thing should just be effortless for me to get into, and that's our problem to solve, and I think there's huge value in us being able to solve it.
Yeah, and I think it's coming. I think we're within 2 years away, and regardless of which platforms you use, which ones you like, which brands, which providers, I think we're going to see that whoever solves that problem is going to take the lead in the space, and that's definitely a challenge for all of us out there. Tim, what are your thoughts on this? Where do you see something learned?
I mean, I agree with that. The heartburn I see, which is around the technology transition in the industry, has a little bit to do with the non-standard approach that many of the service providers have taken. So for years it was driven, and we had SIP and we had 323, and it was standard-based interop, and a lot of energy was put towards making sure that even our products could work with other competitors in the market. The heartburn now is that none of the real vast players are standard based. They've all gone proprietary in their signaling and their communications, and they're all islands. So we're going to go back in time a little bit to having to make sure that those islands are communicative across of their users, right? So that's unfortunate. I think WebRTC did a good job of trying to solve that. It just never kind of got there 100%. It'll be interesting to see if that does get digested as the common mechanism that all of the UC vast players end up going into. But that's probably a future looking, as to how the market plays out. But right now we know, right? They're all islands, and we're trying to, make technology that bridges the islands. But that's always difficult because now you're chasing multiple applications and trying to keep up with an infrastructure that's doing features across the board for everybody, which is a hard thing to do for any company. I think that in the big scheme, though, the exciting part is just the fact that the proliferation is there, the workflows are there. Right? Video has become a commonplace community, the UC applications, a commonplace model for virtually all companies between education and medical and large enterprises, and that's not going to change. Right? There's no going backwards. Right? That commitment happened. People are using it on a day-to-day basis, and it's driving. What I think is interesting is driving a change in the environment of the enterprise. Right? More people are working at home now because they simply can do that and have a great experience communicating with their fellow employees. Right? So you're starting to see smaller conference rooms because there's a need to have these small, what we're calling huddle room in the industry, is these small rooms where a few people can go in and have calls with the people working at home quickly in a sort of an ad hoc fashion, rather than everybody's in the office. So now we need a room that sits at least 8 because everybody's got to be in the room for the meeting. Well, now if 5 people are working from home and there's only 3 people in the office, it's a lot easier just to go jump in a small space and have those calls.
And on
So
top
the
of that,
trend,
the office itself is smaller because you don't need to spend as much money on real estate. And not only is the company saving money, but because I'm working from my basement here in New Jersey, I'm not commuting into Manhattan, so that's an hour there and an hour back. That's 2 hours a day I get back that I can actually be
right.
more productive. If I have to pick up my kids from school, I didn't lose the day. I can go do that and come back home. It's such a win-win-win that this technology and the way we've started to use it has completely changed the culture.
It really has. I mean, and I think as you go forward, 3, 4, 5 years, and even some of the, design architects as they look at the spaces, the open spaces coming in with a whole ton of small offices that people can go in and use, come out quickly if they need a private space, or they need to have communication with people that are working externally. But that's a much easier environment to develop from a business perspective, right? And that's just a part of the changes that the technology is driving. And I think as it gets smarter, as Casey was talking about the artificial intelligence and the integration of predictive information, it's stuff that we're looking at doing and integrating, just counting the number of people in a room, right? We both hear this as a request from a lot of IT organizations, just to know the resource usage model, right? Or how effective are those rooms, on and off calls, right? Just in general, right? So now you start to see sensors, which fundamentally microphones and cameras are, being able to give more information back to the IT organizations and let them manage their businesses in a more effective way from a space perspective, but also just usage within the rooms. And I think you're going to start to see that leak into other vertical markets, legal, healthcare, as AI starts to get smarter, awareness of the patients and using the video and audio and being able to analyze and help assist in the analysis, all that stuff just going to continue to add to the effectiveness of either the employee or the doctor or the nurse or the little lawyer, et cetera. Just more information that gets digested in the cloud and models that get compared to it, and now you can give more options back in real time.
I think we're living in some real exciting times for our space, and I think the parallel between what was done as we tried to get from the Earth to the Moon with what we're doing right now in terms of the technology is real. I'd certainly recommend, if you haven't seen that series, by the way, the HBO series From the Earth to the Moon, you should definitely take a look at that on demand or grab the DVD. Is that a dating myself thing? I'm not even sure if it is anymore, but definitely take a look at that because it kind of gives you a feel of what it was like to grow up in those times. Also, one I'd recommend if it's still on Amazon is How William Shatner Changed the World, which is again this idea of science fiction and projects and how these technology pieces just start to creep into what we're really doing, and making the next, communications device and the next intelligent computing device. It's really exciting to have grown up as an engineer in these times, and we still have some exciting years ahead of us, thank goodness. So I'll give you guys the last word. Casey, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how would they reach out to you, and any other thoughts on this before we close out?
Well, professionally, you can certainly use my email address, casey.king@poly.com. I'm on Twitter at KCWSJ. If you want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn. There's lots of a lot of different ways to get a hold of me. I do want to just kind of close, at least with my comments, with just one last thought, and it's, we build the world's simplest application. Once you get into a call like this, we just talk to each other, and people have had, for since the beginning of mankind, we live around telling stories, and increasingly we're using images and video to kind of tell those stories in a more effective way. And when you look back at the 60s and when Kennedy came out and said we're going to put a man on the moon in this decade, It's going to be about, your service of what you can do to your country, instead of, what your country can do for you. He painted this just beautiful picture, this beautiful story that allowed a lot of people to kind of rally behind that and do something just incredible. So what I'm really hoping for, and I mean, all of us are certainly passionate about, video collaboration and audio collaboration and, and just data collaboration, but how do we use these new technologies and behavior changes to actually improve these communication skills? And that's what I think is what we can, machine learning is great. It's a tool and a toolkit. It's what we do on top of that to abstract that out into these, larger, bigger kind of behavior changes. So that's what I'm super excited about, doing at Poly to, kind of move that along for the next few years.
Terrific. Thank you, Casey. Tim, how do people get a hold of you, and any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, great day. First of all, super excited and my pleasure to work with both of you. It's been only a short window of time, but I really have enjoyed it so far, and I hope we continue to do it for a long time together. So my contact again, tim.root@poly.com is my work. I'm also on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way. Also track me down online. Just look me up, Tim Root at Poly, and you'll find me. So my closing thoughts here is, that this industry is still just in its baby stages. The products that are going to start to come out with different form factors and connectivity and vertical market applications around this communication technology that really it's been the last 5 years that there's been this massive transition in the value proposition and the integration and quality. It's just super exciting, right? That we are literally on the cutting edge of probably the early days in the 60s when they were figuring out, boy, this is possible. We are in the stages of this is possible, that this industry and this technology is going to be everywhere and be fundamental to everyone's life. If it's not already with many people, it's only going to explode and get further and further entrenched into how we live our lives. So that's just exciting to be part of. So.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Casey. I really appreciate it. My thoughts parallel all of yours. I think this is one of the most exciting times to be in our industry, where technology is going up, where costs are plummeting. What it's going to cost you to put in a room codec compared to what it would have cost, even 3, 4, 5 years ago. Some major disruptive things on the horizon, and I'm excited to be part of it, and excited to be able to work with you guys and a lot of our new colleagues as we pull all this together. So I'm going to let that be the last word for AVNation TV and for my colleagues at the IMCCA. I'm David Danto. You guys know how to reach me. Just Google my name. It's all over the damn internet. You know that. Until the next time, thanks very much for joining us. And I'll see you next time.